Welcome everybody to our event today, where we'll be discussing ICE and CBP, the cultures of immigration and customs enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, the two agencies that fall under the Department of Homeland Security, and asking the question, are they reformable? We're looking at that question today thanks to the real lived experiences of three men who have lived under the shadow of both CBP and ICE. Less than a month ago, although it feels like years ago, I stood witness to the all too typical law and order response of our border. I was at Del Rio when the border closed, and I could not get across to or under the bridge to help out with the Haitian asylum seekers that had arrived there. That was less than a month ago, and in that time, 7,600 of those seeking asylum at our southern border were returned to a country in chaos, many of them having been gone for a decade or more, and with children who were not born there. That experience reflects what happened a year ago today, or a year ago yesterday, when, Thomas is saying sound is not on. Is anybody hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you, I think, now.
Yes, hearing you, yes.
Yeah, sound is on. Okay, sound fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody, for checking in. Anyway, the experience we've just lived through, was not new, was not unusual. We experienced it. We lived through it again a year ago yesterday, when a mass deportation flight took off from a Texas airfield and ferried roughly 100 people back to harmful situations in African countries, in particular to Cameroon. First, there was the October 13th flight, and then the November 11th flight. And for those of you who don't know, Cameroon is a country characterized all too often by the moniker civil war. I don't think that's particularly true. It's a country in which the majority Francophone government, with the aid of a powerful military, has declared war since late 2016 on its minority Anglophone population. And that is just about the time we started to see the first wave of Cameroonian asylum seekers reaching our southern border. They came in search of refuge. They came in search of safety. That is what the United States puts out to the world, that we are a place of refuge and a place of safety, a place of human rights and a place of laws. Instead, these people, while exercising their lawful right to ask for asylum, were locked up, held, many of them, for years under deplorable conditions, and then deported back to harm and under egregious circumstances. 3 of those individuals will be heard from today. We will start, the occasion of this webinar is that, and press conference, is that Professor Fatma Maroof, who is also a panelist, and I filed a complaint against ICE yesterday on behalf of the complainants you see here before you, God's Will, Castillo, and a third gentleman who we're calling Ray, who hasn't managed to get online yet. He's in a place where his signal is very, very unreliable. And we'll hear from each of them. And then we're going to hear from Professor Maroof about the complaint and sort of the legal arguments that she's brought to it. And then we will open it up. Oh, you can't see me? Julie, they still can't see me. I still can't enable my video. And then we will open, there we are, now I can. Sorry everybody, being a disembodied voice. Here I am. And then we will open it up to you for questions. So housekeeping, if you want to chat amongst yourselves, please do so. Please just chitty chat in the chat box. we'll have that open for to add links to things along the way, and to add our call to action at the end of the webinar. But if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A. All right, and we will have somebody feeding to us who the question should be directed to. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to our 3 stars of our show. And we're going to start with Ray, even though he's not here. We knew that he might have trouble getting in. So we created an audio, pre-recorded audio version of his testimony, which I'm going to play for you right, where is it? Right now.
In my country, when I organized with some teacher a protest march.
I organized with
march,
teachers a protest march about marginalization, discrimination,
and so many
killings caused by the military.
Went to police station. I was beat.
At the police station, I was beaten there with a machete
for so many hours. But when I was released, I have some pain.
I had pain in my feet.
I didn't have justice in my country.
No justice in my country.
I'm just afraid about my life also. That's why I need to flee.
That's why I need to flee to the USA for freedom. I crossed so many countries.
When I reached USA, ICE treating us like animals.
ICE.
Like you are not a human being. Me was fighting for my life and came to us to protect USA.
All right, somebody's saying they can't hear him. Is that true?
No, I think they can hear him, but I think maybe, I know you're trying to clarify what he's saying, but it might be easier with just only his voice.
Just to hear him. Okay, you got it. I'll just back up again.
So that's why I need to flee until the USA to get freedom. I crossed so many countries. When I reached USA, ICE treating us like animals. Like you are not a human being. Me was fighting for my life and came to us to protect USA. But when I reached detention, I just told them that I have pain, but they did not take care. They don't give me ibuprofen every time. And also they give me some medicine, some strong medicine. But when I took them, I feel better for few days, and later they restart. I also, when I was detention, I get COVID-19. 2 years, 10 months, I did in detention. My judge, when I was in the Florida detention center, was not taking importance to look my case. The bad situation that I live before in my country, I was so afraid because I did not have lawyer. I present myself. I don't want to go back in my country, and I tried to refuse to go in the plane. They just pound me in the ground until my back was in the floor. They put the back that they wrap me. They put there already, and they just tie up all my body until my knee was closed. Is my mouth. I didn't breathe. I told him, he said that I didn't breathe. When I told him that I didn't breathe, he told me that he don't care. That I need to stay easy. And the pain that I have is my feet already start to make me feel bad. And I just cried. I just cried there. And when they did like that, rules. Because when the people came out and go straight in the airplane, they saw me, I was in the ground. And they leave me there until all the people go inside the plane. I was crying. That I was feeling terribly, pain everywhere. I told them that they just leave me in that position until one officer came and asked me that if they remove that wrap to stay quiet, they will put again. When they remove, I have a lot of difficulty to walk. The two officers just carry me until the plane. I'm just disappointed about that decision that they took to send us back. So many of us was arrested in airport. Some leave Cameroon already. Some people that was arrested, was arrested in airport. I don't know if they are alive right now, or I don't know if they are still in the prison. Since I was sent back in Cameroon, we just hide. If I knew that I will leave the situation that I live in USA, I will stay in those countries like Mexico or Costa Rica or some country else. But I did not know that those countries can give opportunity to seek asylum. The only country that I knew is USA. When I leave my country, I'm free. I took that USA was a country that will protect us. I took that USA was a country where we can have justice, the real justice. I took that the USA was the country where we can be free. We can explain ourselves about the treat that we were subjected in our country. I am not a criminal. I just came there to seek asylum. The US government know about the situation that happened in my country. They know that they said all spouse or die.
So they knew they were sending us back to die. His final words. Yeah, they were still at the detention center, from which they were being transported to another detention center in Texas called Prairieland. He did not want to go. He was potentially at the front of the line. They made an example out of him, he says in his speech there, tackled him to the ground, tied him up in a restraint device called the wrap, and pushed his face, his knees, his mouth to his knees. We're getting the question, when did he come? He says he was in detention for 2 years and 10 months. He entered on or about January 2018, was it, Fatma? In Texas. And 2 years and 10 months later was deported in this, not just 5-point restraints, but in this additional bondage on top of these 5-point restraints, which we have come to figure out is called the wrap. Yeah, so in his case, he was still at detention centers. This was before the flight. He suggests, and we believe, that he was wrapped by ICE to make an example of him so that the others would say, "Ooh, I don't want that to happen to me," and comply and, file onto the plane. So next we're going to hear from Castillo, who was on the subsequent flight also to Cameroon, with others also on the flight to Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We believe that in the October flight, there were 3 men who were wrapped. One we believe was Senegalese, because eyewitnesses say that somebody was unwrapped in Dakar and taken off the plane. I haven't been able to track him down yet. And the third man, who is also party to our complaint, and goes by the name of Ernest, was wrapped and also put in a full-headed hood. The next month, we had another flight go. It should be said that both of them went on legal US holidays. This made it harder for attorneys to come to the rescue with last-minute stays of motion. And so in November, Ernest was wrapped again a second time, hooded again a second time. And we also had Castillo and God's Will on that flight. So now I'm going to turn it over to Castillo so he can tell you a little bit about his experience. And there we go. Yeah, that question was just answered. So go ahead, Castillo.
Yeah, good evening to everyone in the house. Yeah, I'm Castillo, sharing my experience about the November deportation flight to Cameroon. Early that morning, 2 officers came to our dorm in Pearland, Dallas, Texas. They asked us to pack our belongings. I demanded that I need to speak to an ICE officer to know my situation, because they cannot just come in the morning and ask me to pack. I don't know where I'm heading to. So I demanded that I need an ICE officer so that you can answer my questions. So the 2 officers, they left. 5 minutes later, they came. They called me, they told me, young man, come, we have discussed with ICE and we found out that you will not be deported, that follow us, carry your things and follow us. I took my belongings and followed them. Instead, they were lying to me. They took me into isolation in a cell. They locked me up. Some minutes later, a nurse came to check over me if I was okay. I told the nurse that I'm okay, but my only worry is where they want to carry me to. So the nurse left. Then a few minutes later again, a group of ICE special team, it's written on their uniform, they're always in charge of deportation, came carrying guns, putting on military uniforms with black tinted eyeglasses. They came to the cell that I was in. They opened the door and immediately start firing bullets at me. Though they were rubber bullets. I received 2 shots on my right thigh and 2 shots on my left shin. They fell on me and took me out of the cell and threw me on the floor inside the hall. They fell on me and I was facing the ground. They held my hands. Either of them hold my hands, some of them were holding my legs. I was shackled at 5-point restraint. I couldn't help myself. I couldn't fight anymore. I couldn't resist. So they shouted, bring the wrap. They brought the wrap and I was put inside the wrap after being shackled at 5-point restraint. I was carried by 4 of those ICE special men to the bus in Pearland. From there, I was transported to the airport in Dallas. While at the airport, I pleaded several times with these ICE officers, that please, I want to use the restroom. But none of them answered my call. None of them tried to help. I was in pain, in deep pain, with the shackles, even with the rope leaving from my neck, my chest level down to my legs, keeping me at an angle of 40 to 60 degrees. I was totally immobile. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help myself. I was crying. We waited at the airport for a very long time before the plane took off. They carried me from the bus to the plane, the same special team ICE officers. I was in the plane, I had to sit on 3 seats because when you are being put in the wrap, you can't bend your knees, you can't do anything. So your legs have to be straight. So I had to sit on 3 seats. While in the plane, midway the Atlantic Ocean, I was crying. Even everyone in the flight was shouting at the officers that they should please pity my situation and let me use the restroom. So they took off the wrap. I went and used the restroom while still at 5-point restraint. All over the whole flight, I didn't eat anything. The last time I ate was the eve of the deportation. So when we got to Cameroon, I was arrested at the airport and taken to and detained. I was detained for 12 days under horrible conditions, no food, no bed, no mattress, no mat, no water to drink. It was a very difficult time for me, even the experience I had while in custody and during my deportation. I still echo the sound of the gunshots, the bullets, everything. It has been a difficult time for me and my family. Right now, I'm hiding in a third country, still fighting to get to safety. The reason I'm sharing this is for the world and the American people to hear what is going on behind the doors of ICE and to fight for those who are still in custody. It has been a difficult time for me, very traumatizing time. So I rest my case.
And we are so very honored and proud of you for coming forward and sharing that, Castillo. And now, without further ado, we'll just pass the mic straight to God's will to hear the third testimony of the experience under ICE and in the RAP. Thanks, God's will.
Hello, everyone. I'm Godswill. I'm here to share my testimony with regards to what I went through with ICE when I was being deported. Throughout my detention stay in the US, I was in Louisiana, Jackson Parish Correctional Center. So I was transported from Jackson Parish Correctional Center to Pearland Detention Center in Texas for deportation. So while we were in the Pearland Detention Center for some days before the day of the flight for deportation. So on the day of the deportation, they came and they carried us, they transported us from the detention center to the airport. And when we arrived at the airport, before they transported us, we were all in shackles. We were in 5-pound restraints. You had chains on your legs, on your hands, and around your waist, and your hands were tied, they were linked up to the chain on your waist. So as we arrived at the airport, now they had to remove every person in a single file. They were sending everybody out according to a list. So when they call your name, you have to walk down and they have to check on you, what they check you and check the restraints to make sure that they're intact and search you to see if you're carrying anything on you. So just to say that before we were transported, I had not eaten for like 2 days because with all the trauma that I was going through, with all the stress that I'd gone through, food wasn't on my agenda. I had lost all my appetite, even though persons that were eating complained about the food that was given there at the detention center at Prairie Land. They even wanted to get commissary that we had in our bags, but they refused to allow us get to the food that we had. As such, we weren't fed properly. So as I was called, they called my name now to go out. So as I went out, they searched me and told me to walk the stairs to walk up to the plane. The ICE officers, they were lined up like from the door of the vehicle right up to the door of the plane. So as I walked towards the very weak, walking gently towards the plane. So as I was about stepping up onto the plane, I slumped and I fell, given I was physically, I was drained out. So as I fell down, to my greatest surprise, I just realized like, I can't say how many of the ICE officers that they were dressed in somewhat like a military uniform. I can't say how many of them, I just discovered that a lot of persons were holding me. They carried me up. I didn't know what they were doing to me. They carried me and they went and placed me on the floor, on the ground, before at the airport there on the rack. I only discovered how they were tying my legs. I was crying. I said, what are they doing? Persons were pressing me, holding me down, and I just discovered my legs were being tied. And it to me, why did they do it to me? But nobody was listening. They were instead talking about just like they were giving their commands on what to do. So they tied my legs down as I was crying out, crying to the doctor, don't do this, you are killing me, you are killing me. But yes, nobody was listening. As they tied my legs, they told me, and now they wore the upper part of the wrap on my body, on my upper body. With the wall, it's just something, so it's like a jacket that it's like just where they put it on you, your hands under, and now they strap you down. They have to now fasten it, they tie your hands under the wrap there. Then now they had to now link on my upper body down to my lower, to my feet. So they had an extra rope, they attached it to the upper part of the wrap, and now linked it down to the lower part of the wrap. As such, now they had to now bring my head. It's like they are carrying my head and bringing my head down towards my feet. So it's like they want to put your head into your feet. I was crying to them that I'm in pain, I am suffering from pain, that they are killing me, but nobody was listening. The strap and some persons were behind my back, so the ICE officers, they were behind my back, they were putting my head towards my feet. So when they finished, they carried me like you carrying a corpse, you carrying a coffin like a log of wood. Three persons on one side, three persons on the other side. Then now they carried me and they were transporting me. I was crying like a child, crying because I knew that. I just told them that, in fact, it's better they just kill me than for them to torture me like this while sending me back to the harm that I know I'm going to, that they should not do this, that they should stop doing what I cried like a baby, pleading to them, I am in pains. I told them that I am in pains, but nobody was listening. They carried me, they went and dumped me on 3 seats in the middle row of the aisles of the plane. The 3 seats in the middle, that we went and dumped me across there. I was crying. The wrap was pressing on the shackles on my leg. The cuffs on my leg, they were digging deep into my flesh, because the wrap since they had tied the wrap over the cuffs, it was now pressing deep, it was eating deep into my flesh. I was crying, I was saying that I'm in pain, but nobody was letting. I told them that I can't breathe, that I am asthmatic. I told them to check on my medical records, that I'm asthmatic, that I'm suffering from back and waist pain. I've been taking medications through action. But they were not, nobody listened. One of the officers came, and as I was trying, instead of him to even try to help me, he instead came and furthermore fasting and was still dragging my head down towards my feet. He is still making it far more difficult again for me to breathe. I cried. Some of the other detainees, deportees that were in the flight, they were shouting, they were crying, why are you killing him? Stop killing our brother, stop killing our brother. But none of them, they were not listening. They were not listening. So as they were pressing, as he did that, I cried out all the more until one officer, now he is the one that came and asked me what's the problem. I told him that the cuffs are digging into my flesh, that I'm feeling a lot of pains on my leg. So he is the one now sent his hand under he sent his hand under the wrap and now try to adjust the cuff so that it should come out, so that I could be relieved of the pain. So as he did that, I was crying that my back, that I am in pain, that I can't even see that my back is pain. I can't even sit I can't even sit well. But nobody listened. I told him that I couldn't breathe, that I find it difficult, that I'm asthmatic. So he's the one, he called the doctor that was on board. The doctor came, I told him that I needed my inhaler, that my inhaler was in my jacket pocket. So he's the one that sent his hand into my jacket pocket and removed my inhaler, and he gave me the inhaler, and he gave me 2 puffs. Since I couldn't use, he's the one that used his hand and put the inhaler in my mouth and gave me 2 puffs while I was still restrained in the wrap at that position. So I was crying to him that I'm in pain. I was crying to him that I'm in pain, but he didn't listen. As he just gave me the inhaler, the 2 puffs, he put back in my jacket and left. I was in that position for hours. I was in that position for hours, crying and begging, but none of them was listening. Nobody was listening to me. Now, until when we were airborne, it was until when we were airborne that it was around the time the pilot always said you could remove your safety belt, but you're advised to keep it on. So now I told him that I cried that I wanted to go to the restroom. So that was when he came and removed the lower part of the wrap. They said if they asked me the question that if they remove this wrap, am I going to cause any sin? I told them that I didn't cause any sin before, so why would I be causing a sin? Why would I wasn't resisting anybody. I wasn't fighting any person. I didn't. So they came now, they removed the lower part of the wrap. So that I could, but I was still in chains so that I could go and use the restroom. I went to use the restroom. My hands were still tied under the upper part of the wrap. So I have now to go and now try to use the restroom, but I couldn't. My hands were chained up, so I tried to urinate. I saw it myself, and I went back to the seat. I sat down. I was still in pains. My back, my waist was killing me. And until when we had to eat the burritos, that was when they came and now removed now the upper part of the wrap so that my hand could get to my mouth. And throughout the journey right back to Cameroon, we're all in shackles. And it was difficult for me to the pain on my back was killing me. So that's how I was throughout until we arrived back at home, was a different trauma that I pay my way, bribe my way, and now I am here still not knowing what my life is going to do. I don't even know if I have hope. I don't know what I can hope in. At times I only pray to God that at times it's better they could just kill me so that let it be finished and be done with. I am just that the world is going to hear to know that we are all human beings. That we are all human beings. We should be able to help Eastern and help us that we are suffering. That those of us that are less privileged, that the world should be able to stand out. That no matter the color of our skin, we should live together like one people. That America, which I know is a country of human rights, to stand out and fight for those of us that were treated badly, those of us that suffered so much, so that the world can see that not one person, that is not about who you are, it's not about where you're coming from, but we are all one people. We are all one people. So I just keep praying to God every day that through this we might get to have a life. So maybe we don't know what is happening tomorrow, but I just know that God alone has a way. That's why my name is God's Will, because God's will always prevail. Thank you very much for your listening.
Wow. Thank you, God's Will. Thank you so much for that testimony. Before I pass the mic from the guys to our lawyer, Professor Maroof, I also want to point out that this complaint has been co-signed by 6 other organizations besides the Texas A&M University School of Law's Immigrant Rights Clinic, which Professor Maroof directs. We have as co-signatories the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, the Undocumented Black Network, the Haitian Bridge Alliance, African Communities Together, Witness at the Border, and who am I missing?
Cameroon, did you mention Cameroon Advocacy?
Cameroon Advocacy Network. I try every time and I always forget one. It's always a different one each time, but we are so grateful to have this powerhouse of energy and momentum behind this complaint. And I hope that if any of the members of those teams are here, that they'll have a chance before we end to give us a shout out and you know, participate with a statement or a comment. But before we go in that direction, I'm going to pass the mic to Professor Maroof to give you a sense of the complaint and where we filed it, what we expect and why. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to thank all three of our complainants for their testimony today. They're all doing this despite the great risk to their own safety. And you can imagine the amount of courage it takes to come forward and share these stories with the general public. The complaint was filed with an internal watchdog office within DHS, actually two offices. One is the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which is often called CRCL. And the other is with the Office of the Inspector General, or OIG, which has an Office of Investigations. And these two agencies work very closely together. Often what CRCL can do is make a recommendation for OIG to investigate. So what we're really hoping will be the next step is that once they get the complaint, they will decide that this is a situation that warrants investigation and that they will start that process. The complaint alleges several deviations from ICE's own detention standards, as well as various federal and state laws, and from the manufacturer's own guidance on how the wrap should be used. So the wrap is actually an FDA authorized medical device, but the way it's supposed to be used is not the way ICE is using it. So just to mention a few of the critical differences, ICE has modified the device in different ways. For example, one of the individuals whose stories is mentioned in the complaint by the pseudonym Ernest was subjected to hooding. So a hood was placed over his head with netting over his face. Both times the wrap was applied to him. People are supposed to be restrained at a 90-degree angle so that their legs are basically perpendicular to their torso. Instead, they're being hunched over, which is why the wrap is often called a tortilla. People are basically folded in half. People are left alone in the wrap. I think Castillo mentioned he was sitting across 3 seats. So you can imagine he's on an airplane. I can't imagine how he would possibly be buckled in or safe in that position. And he's left there, on a row of the plane by himself with no one, directly supervising him. Godswill has asthma, and so even individuals with severe medical conditions are placed in this wrap without a doctor being always present with them, without even making sure if it's safe for them to be placed in the wrap beforehand. And the wrap is only supposed to be used on board flights, but in every case that we've documented, the wrap was applied before the flight, in some cases hours before the flight. So for example, Castillo was placed in the wrap at Prairieland Detention Center, transferred in the wrap on a bus ride to the airport, and then left in the wrap, not just, till he was boarded onto the plane, but until he was halfway over the Atlantic Ocean. So these are huge deviations. There's one other legal precedent case that I found that talks about, the wrap specifically, and it's a case involving a private school for boys. And some of the key issues there that led the judge in that case, the federal district court judge, to find that the use of the wrap amounted to torture are some of the same issues that we see here. One is that the boys had physical and mental health conditions that weren't taken into account. That's exactly what's happening here. And 2 is they were left in the wrap for hours, which is not how the wrap is supposed to be used. We see that happening here, sometimes for many, many hours. So these raise very serious legal concerns. Some of the claims we have brought are under the United Nations Convention Against Torture, under the Rehabilitation Act, which protects people with disabilities and programs that receive federal funding, under state criminal and tort laws, as well as under federal civil rights laws, criminal laws that pertain to discrimination based on race and civil rights violations related to that. So we're hoping that we believe these are very serious allegations, and we hope that they will be investigated.
Okay, and that is all on top of the fact that all deportees are deported in chains. In the case of these asylum seekers, it was 5-point, which is hand shackled to a waist chain, also connected to ankle shackles. And the flight to Douala took 16 hours. After we filed the complaint yesterday, we got word from another legal scholar in Florida that she is representing Somali asylum seekers who were also put in some kind of restraint in 2017. And after reading our complaint, she's convinced it was also the rap, and they were shackled for 48 hours. So there's just they're just human rights violations on top of human rights violations here. Now let's we're here to open it up to questions. We've got another 15 minutes left. I do have one question from a member of the press that came in earlier. And so why don't I just ask that now, because there doesn't seem to be anything in the chat window. Hang on.
There's one question I saw in the chat about why we didn't file in a court of law. So whichever order you want to ask them.
Oh, do you want to go ahead and ask that first, and then I'll get to the press questions.
Yeah, I mean, right now, this is our first step. Usually before you file a lawsuit in a court of law, it's actually required that you exhaust administrative remedies, meaning you first seek relief at the agency level. So, you know, we should really go through this process before contemplating a lawsuit. And I'm actually hoping that with, you know, with the severity of these allegations, an investigation will be started in this case.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth telling everyone, Fatma, how often complaints filed with DHS, CRCL actually get any kind of response, much less remedy.
Yeah, unfortunately, the response rate is not great. However, we still feel like this is an important step to take. Among other things, it does give them an opportunity, and it gives us a chance to get more information from them about the RAP. So it both brings these issues to the agency's attention, allowing a closer internal review of what's happening. And it gives us a chance to try to get more facts about what's happening as well.
And here's a question that comes from a reporter at The Independent. She wants to know, how widespread do you think the use of the restraint is, and were the restraints used at any other detention centers?
So unfortunately, we don't know the answer to the first question because most people who are deported are never heard from again. There's no, you know, there's unfortunately not a good way to gather data about who has been subjected to the restraint. But it's definitely not only this detention center, or only this flight, because as Sarah mentioned, once this complaint was filed and people found out about it, there's at least one other detention center in the flight to Somalia, the 2017 sort of hell flight to Somalia that had to turn around and come back to the United States because it couldn't land. We know that people on that flight were subjected to the RAP. That flight left out of Florida 3 years ago. So this isn't, it must be happening more than we know about, but we don't know how often.
Which goes to our overarching question of the cultures of impunity within these agencies of DHS, and are they remediable? Is that the word? Are they reformable? In a case where you have law enforcement agencies that have no oversight and no accountability, where violence and abuse is normalized and then normalized again and then normalized again, do we have any hope of being able to reform these agencies, particularly an agency that was begun to exclude people based on color, and which was originally populated by white men with racist tendencies? Do you have an opinion, Professor Maroof?
I mean, I think agency culture in general is hard to change, including by changing the law. So I think to change an agency culture, there needs to be a lot of work done in terms of what kinds of, how people's performance is evaluated, because that tends to be a motivating factor. So if people are really rewarded, or if their performance is based on how many deportations they carry out or how many people they detain, that's not going to create change within the agency. There has to be other metrics that are used that actually reward people for having different behavior. But culture is unfortunately difficult to change. I see some other questions in the chat about what kind of remedies we're seeking. I thought I might just touch on that. So at this point, we're asking ICE to investigate, and we're basically saying we think that the way the RAP is being used is unlawful, and we're asking for the 3 complainants to be granted humanitarian parole so that they can return to the US to participate fully in an investigation.
And ultimately, I mean, in the long run, it would be nice to have everyone who was on these flights returned. That's another issue is, we're talking about a little more than 100 people. Clearly not a huge number, definitely absorbable into the US population, particularly when they all have loved ones that were waiting for them to sponsor them and take responsibility for them. And there's a whole other issue here of the expense that goes into, deporting people in these miserable conditions.
Yeah, the question about whether it continues today, I mean, we have no reason to believe this practice has stopped. I don't think the fact that there's been a change in the president means that this practice has stopped. My best guess would be that, yes, it's still being used on flights. Again, we don't know how commonly it's used, but from the reports we have, the RAPs are laid out at the airport before flights, before buses come for deportation as sort of a warning sign that there are RAPs that were seen in the overhead compartment. So they're fully stocked and ready to use them. And we know that, I don't know, Sarah probably knows better the number, but I think hundreds of RAPs at least are sold to ICE every year. So ICE has them, and ICE is using them.
Yeah. We have a couple more legal questions, and then I just want to see if there's any more questions for the guys. Lee Goodman would like to know, do you receive a response to the complaint you filed? Do you have knowledge of if and when it is going to be investigated?
No, but not yet. They will let us know if they're going to investigate. So far, all we know is that they've received the complaint, that they have filed it. So that's, it was just filed yesterday. So we don't know yet what they're going to do. I see a question about if ICE investigates. So I want to clarify, ICE does not investigate. There is an independent agency within DHS, the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and the Office of the Inspector General that investigate. They are not part of our ICE.
Okay, great. Martha's question I can answer. What company manufactures the RAP? It's called Safe Restraints Ltd, I think. It's out of Diablo, California, and it's a bunch of former law enforcement officers who designed this to flip the former design of full body restraint, which restrained the upper body and tied the lower body to it. It had a nasty habit of killing people by asphyxiation. So the RAP was meant to flip that design, immobilize the legs and keep the person upright so they can breathe. So the ICE is using it in a manner that is not in line with manufacturer guidelines because it cinches people up. It uses the strap from chest to legs to cinch people up into a stress position. Do other countries use the RAP restraint when deporting? Any other country this humane? Yes, Rua. Yes, there are other, we don't know about the RAP, but there are other countries that own the RAP. The RAP is sold not only to the US, but also to the UK and to Australia, the greatest offenders where deportation practices are concerned and detention practices are concerned. So haven't investigated yet if they are using the RAP, but they certainly deport in a similar manner that the US is deporting people. Do we have any idea why this is used on long haul flights only? Corley, I think that is kind of the $64,000 question, right? Because the long haul flights are typically Black immigrants.
But it's also not just used on long haul flights. So for example, we've seen it being used on buses. We've seen it being used temporarily before people are put on flights. Like Ray was wrapped at the Alexandria, Louisiana airport where ICE has a temporary staging area / holding cell. So yes, these are Black migrants. but it's not just used on long haul flights.
Kira's wondering how we can help financially. I hadn't thought about a call to action about helping financially, but I will drop into the chat a social media toolkit that we would love for you all to click on and uplift and spread in your socials to help spread the word about the complaint and about the use of the RAP. There's an awesome video explainer in there that is voiced by Brianne Palmer of the UndocuBlack Network. I'm wondering, there's lots of questions coming in now, and I'm wondering in the last few minutes before we can turn back to the questions, but I'm just wondering if anybody has a question for God's Will or for Castillo, or if any of our co-signatories would like to unmute themselves and speak up. The link to the toolkit, Sheila, is right there in a couple of panes above your question. I just popped it in. Can you see it? Harold, no, these are not commercial flights. They are deporting commercially, but those are usually, you know, deportees are in their clothes and they're usually escorted by 2 ICE officers. These were commercial, chartered flights on Omni Air International, which is a Department of Defense troop mover normally, but it's also moving people for ICE. Don't see the link. Okay, I'll do it again. Anybody have a question for our guys, for our complainants?
So I saw a question about what good is an investigation. So some of the things that can happen with an investigation is ICE agents involved will be directly questioned about their behavior. So already there is one more step of accountability than there's been so far. They can be internally disciplined. ICE can evaluate and decide that the way it's using the RAP is not as required, and can issue more guidance on that, for example, or can train officers better on that. So do I think this is enough? Probably not, but it is the first step.
All right, did that link come through now? Yes, thank you, good, okay. Right, so this week, this complaint actually kicks off another event that is being fronted. It's embedded in lots of events that are taking place right now in defense of Black migrants, and this is the week of action that is being supported by BAJI, Black Alliance for Just Immigration. It's today is also the Haitian Bridge Alliance led National Day of Action. So take a look at the No More Deportations website. There might be actions and protests going on in your neighborhood or somewhere close by. We're not going to stop with today. If you'd like to mobilize your own event, the weekend is good, and next week as well. And starting Monday will be the Cameroon Advocacy Network is kicking off their week of action to argue for TPS for Cameroon, that's temporary protected status for Cameroonians currently living in the United States. Legislation was introduced in the House yesterday or the day before, with including a new TPS bill. So we need your members of Congress to sign on to that bill. And although TPS is not perfect, it's a good start to make sure that Cameroonians currently in the United States aren't just swept up and deported, which too often happens under ICE. So we can end the webinar, I guess, with is ICE and CBP reformable? And what will it take to reform them? We have a response. Okay, last minute question from Diane Solis of Dallas Morning News. Why are asylum seekers jailed in detention centers to begin with?
I'm happy
Wow,
to
that's a
that.
great question.
I don't know if that's a legal question or a theoretical, hypothetical question, but I mean, unfortunately, our immigration law provides for mandatory detention of asylum seekers who come up to the port of entry and legally exercise their right to request asylum. So that is, you know, a huge part of the law that I think needs to be changed. It's very hard for asylum seekers to get out of detention. It's easier for someone who crosses unlawfully and then files for asylum later to not be detained than for somebody who legally presents themselves at the border and asks for asylum and are taken therefore into mandatory detention. So we have a very a system that really does penalize people for seeking asylum, even though that's not supposed to be the case.
Yeah, and we could go on and on. In fact, Title 42 is because it is understood that detention is a COVID risk. Title 42 is also being misused.
So Title 42, yeah, Title 42 is of the Public Health Act and is currently being used to turn back asylum seekers at the border, as you may know. So I'm not sure what the comment exactly means, but I think what the person says is that if we allow asylum seekers in and that they're detained, they're going to be it's presumed there'll be a COVID risk. But I think it's even broader than that, that people are afraid of letting potentially COVID positive people into the country, whether or not they're detained, I think is the reasoning. And of course, it's never been used that way historically. Title 42 has never been used as a end run around our asylum laws before.
No, and it was started under Trump and should have been rescinded by Biden, but still hasn't. Which does make you wonder how things have changed in a Democratic administration. In fact, our last question by Melissa Bowen is, when was the law written which requires asylum seekers to be detained? And I think that dates back to Clinton, right?
I think it might even be earlier than that, but I don't think I can answer that question. I mean, it is part of the 1952 Immigration Act, but I don't know if it was amended later or not. But something we can look at.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there. I'm happy to stay and chat and unmute people if a small group wants to stay and talk. But first, can we all please lend our support and our gratitude to God's Will and Castillo and Ray in absentia for coming forward despite the odds, despite the danger, to make sure that this apparatus is never used on anybody again. Can we have big shout out of gratitude in your space for our 6 migrant rights organizations who are co-signatories to our complaint, and to you, big gratitude for coming and joining us today and joining the fight and the movement to repeal and repeal cruelty, repeal policies based on cruelty, and begin to welcome with dignity. Because one thing we can all agree on, and that is cruelty is not okay. It just isn't. It just isn't. So thank you very much. If any of you out there are members of the press and want to speak to myself or Fatma or the guys or anyone in the coalition, please don't hesitate to email us. I'll drop my email in the chat, but I don't think people are seeing the chat. I'm only getting hosts and panelists. I'm not getting attendees. So that's been a problem. Anyway, somebody can pass that on. And I guess we'll end it there unless anybody wants to stay on.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.